Pennsylvania Bigfoot Project. Hi guys, how you doing? Hey, boy, see we got quite a few on here. I'm just gonna say hi to everyone. Good to see y'all. And I see that we do have a couple prayer requests in the chat. Hey Phyllis, and especially an unspoken prayer request. Along with a couple of our members and a few other people. One of my neighbors is asking prayer also. But thank you and welcome to Pennsylvania Bigfoot Project, the Monkey Wench podcast. Hi, Sharon. All right. We've got a few announcements to make, and then we'll get to our special guest this evening. Let me see here. And I see he's backstage, so okay, Twisted. Yeah, prayers for Bigfoot Outlaw Grizzly. Oh, he is very sick. Okay, we'll keep him in our prayers, along with Roger Williams. He also is in need of prayer for healing. And hey, Mark, Phyllis, Gary. I know there's a lot of you in there, so I can't say hi to everyone, but welcome. Okay, announcements. Let's see. Not August. Boy, what am I saying? April 24th through the 27th is our Pennsylvania Bigfoot Project, the first camp out of the year. That will be at Michaud State Forest. That is in Cumberland County, Pennsylvania. That's at the bottom of the state, south central, right along the Maryland state line, maybe a half an hour from Gettysburg. So if you attend the camp out, you'll be able to run over to Gettysburg and do a little bit of exploring there also if you have the time. So it should be exciting. I haven't been there yet. I've been to Gettysburg quite a few times, but I've yet to go to Michaud. So I'm really looking forward to this. I have another camp out planned. The location will be announced on Friday evening. That information will be, along with the Michaud State Forest camp out, that information will be in the main group, Pennsylvania Bigfoot Project. And if you're not a member yet, please join. That's on Facebook. Let's see. Yeah, we'll have one. Right now, I'm planning on, like every other month through October. So we'll see. And we'll try to get them as reasonably priced as possible. State forest campgrounds are very reasonable, so we'll do the best we can. Hey, Larry. Hi, Levon. Okay, and the Salt Fork State Park camp out, their dates, that's a separate group, they're friends. Their campouts are every month beginning April 10th through 13th. May, June, July, August, September, October. That information is in the group also, the main group. Those are hosted by SOSB, Southeast Ohio Sasquatch Bigfoot Investigations, I think is what it stands for. That's led by Doug Waller. Okay, and let's see, today is the 19th. Let me, okay. Ooh, okay. Next week's podcast is the last podcast of the month. And you longtime fans, you know what the last show of the month is. That's our Fan Appreciation Day. We do a prize giveaway. We do a drawing, so make sure you are here for the drawing. Let's see. Order your official Pennsylvania Bigfoot Project logo merchandise. You can order through me personally. I've got photos and more information in the main group. And let's see, I will be speaking and have a booth set up at the Forest County Bigfoot Festival. That is in Marionville, Pennsylvania, June 6, 7, and 8. And I don't have what day that I'll be speaking yet. that'll be coming up. And I am scheduled for more festivals and conferences throughout the summer and into the fall. So I'll announce them as time gets closer. And if anyone has any prayer requests, thank you, Larry. Yeah, Blackie. I have a saying on the other groups, Larry. I always say that don't make me angry. Hulk smash to get the and do the thumbs up, on the group. Like the podcast, or else I'll get angry and do the Hulk smash. Again, guys, if anyone has a prayer request, please, you can just say unspoken prayer request here in the chat, or else you can write me. Oh, okay, Tracy, I'll keep you in my prayers. And you can send me a private message, contact me through Facebook Messenger. You're welcome to contact me, anytime. All right, so let's Twisted. Yeah, it's going to be a fun summer. I guarantee you. It's going to be fantastic. All right, now let's get ready for our special guest. Our special guest is Brian. Brian is a native Pennsylvanian and lives in Pennsylvania. He's been married to Debbie for 36 years. They have 2 children, a son and a daughter. Both are married. Brian and Debbie have 6 grandchildren. God bless you. Their son and his wife have 3 sons, and their daughter and her husband have 3 daughters. Wow. That's great. A very happy family, noisily filled with life. Brian is a Bible teacher, and one of his favorite things to do is to interact with others on any one of the numerous topics that the Bible has to offer. He's been looking forward to being here tonight to share with you about the cherubim, the seraphim, and about the Nephilim, who they were, and time allowing, what that might mean for us today. So guys, if you have any questions for Brian, please type them in capital, all caps. That way I'll be able to spot the questions. I really appreciate that, guys. All right, so with that, let's get Brian on here. Hi, Brian.
Good evening. How are you, Mary?
Good. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Good to see you again as well. It's good to be here.
Oh, good. Yeah, we've Brian and I have speaking about doing this, and finally we're able to get it scheduled, and I'm so happy that you were able to get on here.
It's good to be on. I'm happy too. It was not really challenging, but there were some hoops, but we made it. So,
Yes.
So that's good. That's good.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So if you could, give us a little, tell us all about what you know about Nephilim and everything else. And if you don't mind, I may throw in a question here or there. And if our, if the chat, if I see any questions from them, what I'll do is I'll put them up on the screen and see if you're able to answer them. But I appreciate it.
If I don't know the answer, I'll just make something up.
There you go.
That'll work. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Just to lay some background, I guess, would be appropriate. The Bible says in 2 Timothy 3:16, that all scripture is given by inspiration of God. So it's all God breathed. I believe that the Bible is the word of God from cover to cover.
Yes.
The Bible is therefore my authority for the things that I'm saying. It's not me, you know. I could give you opinions and speculations and everything else, and but what value is that? There's no place to stand on the opinions of another person about, especially about the topics we're going to talk about tonight. When we talk about these entities that dwell in the unseen realm, which we sometimes call angels, just by its very nature, that subject, we need an authoritative source to inform us about that which we cannot see. So Ken Ham of Answers in Genesis, he's called the Bible the history book of the universe. And considering the universe is described in the Bible as starting by God's creative act, that makes a lot of sense. He's put everything together. And more relevant, perhaps, to our discussion, L.A. Marzulli of Spiral of Life Ministries, he describes the Bible as the guidebook to the supernatural. And I think that's a really apt title as well. Yeah. By definition, then, both of those, the Bible is the best historical record we have of events, especially that which happened before the catastrophic upheaval of the great flood of Noah. And that's where we first learn about the Nephilim. So that's important for having that authoritative source for that. But also the Bible is the best guide for that which exists beyond this natural order. That's basically what supernatural means, right? It goes beyond the natural order that we normally experience from day to day. So the Bible serves as a framework for both history and reality. So as we discuss the subjects tonight, we can, this will keep us, I believe, from wandering off into realms of speculation and things like that. So the first verse of the Bible famously says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." There's two realms talked about there. There's the realm of the heavens and the realm of the earth. The word heavens is plural. The Bible talks about three heavens. The first heaven is where the birds fly, as it's sometimes described, the atmosphere that we have around us, where the clouds are, and so forth. Secondly is the beyond that into the universe, the greater universe, where the sun, moon, stars, planets, and everything like that is existing, and untold mysteries out there. And then the third heaven is the unseen realm. Paul talks about in one of his letters to the Corinthians about being caught up to the third heaven and seeing things which he isn't able to utter or describe. And then the Apostle John also in chapter 4 of Revelation is taken into heaven, to that unseen place, the dwelling place of that unseen host. So that from what we see here, he creates the heavens and the earth. The heavenly realm is created first, and then the earthly realm is created afterward. And later on in Genesis 1 and into Genesis 2, the last verse of Genesis 1, first verse of Genesis 2, it says this: God saw everything that he had made, and indeed all of it was very good. And so the evening and the morning were the sixth day. And thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished. So we have the residents of both realms mentioned there. All the host of the heavens and all the host of earth. There are residents in that heavenly realm that God created during this time. And then there are also the residents of the earthly realm, where you and I and everybody listening here tonight has lived all our lives. So that's where we're at. From getting back down to the main topic then, with kind of that background, from what we can tell in the Bible, this is what we have about these residents of that unseen realm, the cherubim and the seraphim. Starting out with the cherubim, in Genesis chapter 3, you have the fall of man. Man rebels against God and sins, and he falls from God's grace, falls from God's mercy, falls really out of position before God. He can no longer really be before God. And so in verse 24 of chapter 3, it says, the Lord God drove out the man, and he placed cherubim at the east of the Garden of Eden, and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. Kind of fascinated about that flaming sword. He places this flaming sword on the east side of Eden. It's turning every way constantly. And when I first was picturing that in my mind, I kind of imagined rather like a blade on a fan turning around. But it's really kind of doing that in 3 dimensions, not just kind of on a 2-dimensional plane, right? And so it's constantly doing this. So it's describing, it's a light, it's a flaming sword. It's describing kind of this sphere, if you think about it that way, in the air, and a bright shining one. How big is it? Who knows? All depends on how big the sword is, right? I imagine God has a pretty big sword, or at least a few of them around, I'm sure. But he also places these 2 cherubim at this same location at the east side of Eden to guard the way to the tree of life, to keep the humans, Adam and Eve, from coming back, or anybody else afterward, I guess, from coming back and partaking of that tree of life. And that's very important because the having fallen from God's grace and they, as soon as they took of that fruit, they began to die. And basically, it's like you're going to begin to die, and you will continue to die until you are dead. And so things completely changed. The change could have been was undoubtedly very dramatic. I shouldn't say could be. It undoubtedly was a very dramatic change in their, even in their appearance. They noticed something was different. And so if they were in that state, but kept coming back to the tree of life and kept living, persisting, imagine that'd be like hell on earth, to continue to die, but yet not be able to die. It almost speaks like in Revelation we read where men are looking to die and they can't. And I don't know what all that means there exactly, but it's that same sort of existence perpetually. So God's really acting merciful there.
Yeah, that would be torture.
Yes. So these cherubim, heavenly beings, are described in the Bible, in their biblical, the role that they have, the function that they have. We don't have any clear descriptions of what one looks like, or anything like that. I think it's because the Bible is directed to this realm. It's written for us here, and the only time we encounter these heavenly beings, these cherubim, seraphim, and others in the Bible or in the text of the Bible is when they're here doing something with us or for our benefit or something like that. So it's not like this constant interaction or whatever. Meanwhile, in heaven, this is going. You don't have that. You do that in the Greek mythology. You have that kind of thing, but it's not in the Bible, and that's kind of fascinating. Not often anyway, unless like John, you're caught up to heaven, and then you have the book of Revelation. In Genesis 3, the cherubim function there as the guardians of the way into Eden. Eden was kind of like God's temple on earth. That's what he set it up to be initially. Said he would come and walk with them there in the garden, in the cool of the day, the beginning of the day, the time with God, the beginning of the day. Always a good thing to have, even now, and it's what they had at that time. And it's really a place to worship God, to find out about him, to learn about him, to fellowship with him. That's what really was happening. The goal that God had, I think, for humanity was to fill the earth. He said, fill the earth, take what you see here and recreate it everywhere else, and that to really turn this whole planet into a very similar paradise, making things in my image to represent who I am everywhere on earth. And I think that was the life that we were to have. All of us were to have.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty good. Lost a good bit.
Yeah.
Go ahead if you have a question or comment.
No.
Yeah, that's one thing. I'll just keep on blabbing until you interrupt me.
Go right ahead. Yeah, you're doing great.
Okay. So another place we see cherubim is, and a little bit more here, I guess, is with the Ark of the Covenant. 2 cherubim are placed on the Ark. In Exodus 25, they're given the instructions: you shall make 2 cherubim of gold, of hammered work. You shall make them at the 2 ends of the mercy seat. Make 1 cherub at one end and the other cherub at the other end. You shall make the cherubim at the 2 ends of it of one piece with the mercy seat. So it's a solid block of gold, and they form it into this basically lid for the box of the Ark of the Covenant, and then these 2 cherubim on top. It says in verse 20, and the cherubim shall stretch out their wings above, covering the mercy seat with their wings, and they shall face each other, and the faces of the cherubim shall actually be down toward the mercy seat. So they're in a bowing position, basically, and this is the presence of God, this mercy seat. It's the intended place for it in the Holy of Holies, where God is at, and they're not looking at him, is the impression we get. Each cherub has 2 wings here that they stretch out across. If you've seen, probably the place most of us have seen it is in the Raiders of the Lost Ark movie, right? And they got it represented pretty well there with the way it's described here, with those 2 wings. Cherubim, these cherubs, don't think the cherubs are kind of like Cupid, with little wings on the back of a baby, flying around or something. Cute little babies with little wings. That's something from Renaissance art that we've picked up, and I don't know whether that was where the idea originated, but that's made it popular anyway. And I sometimes think maybe the people who were paying for the painting to be done, said I had 6 grandchildren. I guess they said, here, put my grandbaby in there. So Raphael or somebody, paints them down on the, I don't know. It's just,
maybe.
Yeah. So maybe baby. Anyway, we don't have an exact description of these cherubim, but I imagine the 2 angels who are guarding the way to God, they must be pretty big fellas. I just, you're talking about the Hulk a little bit earlier, not too far off, maybe. So, except maybe they don't get angry, and hopefully they don't do that. I wouldn't want to make one angry. I know that much. Not one of the angels of God.
Certain. Wow, especially with that flaming sword.
Yeah, really, that would be enough. Just send a table knife in doing that in my room, and I'll be out of there. Whatever you need me to do, I'll do it. Okay, just get that out of here. Let's talk about seraphim a little bit. As it appears in the Bible, seraphim is a Hebrew word that is just spelled out with English letters. It's anglicized or whatever, because the alphabet, obviously, of Hebrew is different than what we have. They even read the other way, from left to right, where we read, or we read left to right. They read from right to left. So seraphim is, Seraphim, and that I-M ending, pronounced im, it means that the word is plural. So when you see that in some of the reading in the Bible and so forth, that I-M, it's a plural, like we have es added to some words to make those plural. They did the same thing with that. So more than one seraph. Okay, seraph would be, of course, the singular. So It's like cherub and cherubim. This is seraph and seraphim.
Yeah.
So
all right, interesting.
It's little tidbits that you pick up. I looked up the Hebrew word seraphim in an online concordance, and I saw that which, by the way, I use Blue Letter Bible online for some of that kind of study. I guess it's sort of a play on words that they put together. You think of a red letter edition of the Bible where Jesus' words are in red. Since the hyperlinks have been in blue for so long. At least they used to be. They called it the Blue Letter Bible, and that helps you to bounce around through to different reference works that they have and stuff. It's really kind of cool. So, the word seraphim appears 7 times in the Hebrew Old Testament text, and it's translated into English twice as fiery serpent, which is interesting. 3 times it appears just as the word fiery itself, and then twice as seraphim, just written out in the, like I say, anglicized, like we said. That fiery thing is a very interesting concept. I think in terms of radiant light, glowing glory, it's like the light is sourced from the object itself, or the entity itself. The angel, the seraph, gives off his own light, his own glory, as it were. In 2 places in Isaiah, in chapter 14, verse 29, and then chapter 30, verse 6, that's where we see the word translated in the King James Version, at least, as fiery flying serpent. That's an interesting term there.
Yeah, that really is.
You think a little bit of dragons or something with fire-breathing dragon or something.
Yeah, like the Chinese New Year, how they have the dragon.
Yeah, dancing.
Right.
People dressed up like a dancing big worm or something,
yes,
with a great big fiery head. So, speaking of Isaiah, there's another description of seraphim in his book in Isaiah 6, verses 1 to 3. This is where the word seraphim appears. Isaiah writes this. He says, "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple." That's kind of smog. Yeah, I just saw that on there. That's for the sitting high and lifted up, and the train of his robe fills the temple. That's the hem of his garment. All right, we talked about how big the angels are. This is God, and he's so big that only the hem of his robe actually fits inside the temple. It's an image of just, I don't know if that's an exact picture, but the idea is he's just so big we can't contain him. We can't keep him in any one place like that. Anyhow, and above this throne stood seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one cried to another and said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." And so they are worshiping him. Seraphim are worshipers. They offer praise to the Lord at his throne. At least that's what we see them doing here.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the cherubim as guardians on the way to God. Seraphim are there, and they are worshiping him and worshiping God and talking about his glory, his holiness. 3 times he says holy. It's like the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, all in those 3 words. Holy, 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 like the Trinity is recognized in some indirect way there.
Yeah.
Seraphim have more than 2 wings. The cherubim have 2 wings, but seraphim have more than 2. These here in Isaiah 6, they have 6 wings. And with 2, they cover their face. We think of the cherubim bowing down. We cannot look at God. Yeah. They can't look at God. Their feet are even covered. Take your shoes off of your feet, because the place where you're standing is holy ground, right? It's just got that kind of feel about it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, you're in the presence of God.
Mm-hmm.
Seraphim are described in Ezekiel with 4 rings. 4 wings. Let's try that now. Rings are hobbits or something. I'm getting mixed up. 4 wings. And Ezekiel says, it doesn't say the word seraphim here, but I'm pretty sure these are doing the same sorts of things that these beings are doing, the same sort of things that the ones in Isaiah were doing. So I'm pretty sure it's a similar thing. Then I looked, and behold, a whirlwind was coming out of the north, a great cloud with raging fire engulfing itself. And I'm not sure. I try to picture these things sometimes. What is it? Just like folding back in on itself and then coming back out? I don't know. It's very strange. It was easy to think about the sword. This has got me confused. And it's radiating out of its midst like the color of amber out of the midst of the fire. Also from within it came the likeness of 4 living creatures. And this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man. So we have a humanoid form, 2 arms, 2 legs, that kind of things we're familiar with, of course. Each one of them had 4 faces, though. And my 2-year-old granddaughter makes lots of faces, but I don't think that's what it's talking about. And each one of them had 4 wings. So, and of course, this is actually part of the whole vision, talking about the wheel within a wheel. Kind of thing. You get further on into Ezekiel 1, you find out the throne of God is the focus of this entire vision. This is like a mobile throne, that God is riding around on, so to speak. Above is wheels within wheels, and above the wheels you find this throne of God, and 4 creatures within the area of God's throne, and that whole assembly is moving through the sky as Ezekiel watches. It goes from here to there to there. It's back and forward. It's moving all over the place. You read something like that, and I've heard this passage, where sometimes people who write about unidentified flying objects and those kind of things refer to this. I believe a lot of that stuff could very well be angelic beings or fallen angels as well. Signs in the sky and that kind of thing. I don't want to go into all that. Well, but
I agree.
Go ahead.
I was just thinking, the initial impression, how your description of the clouds rolling in on themselves, I'm picturing like whenever a rocket takes off, how the flames and the smoke and everything.
It's like rolling smoke, isn't it? Yeah. That's a good.
And the flame, everything.
Yeah.
And just a thought.
Yeah. It's looking something like that, right?
Yeah.
And just a sense of a whole lot of energy and power coming out of this kind of thing. Especially for somebody who's never seen a rocket take off like Ezekiel, it must have been something. So now seraphim, like I said, doesn't appear anyway. That word doesn't appear anywhere in Ezekiel 1, but seraphim were described in Isaiah 6 as being around the throne of God, and that's what we see here. So basically, same kind of thing, I think, in those terms. Talking about the word angels just for a little bit. Biblically speaking, I don't know that it's accurate to call either the cherubim or seraphim as angels. There's no place where that actually happens. I wouldn't be a real stickler about this, but the reason I say that is that this time we're moving into the New Testament for this. Although you have angels in the Old Testament. The Greek word translated in the New Testament as angel is angelos, from which we get our word angel, right? And angelos appears 186 times in the New Testament. It's translated as the word angel 179 of those times, and then as messenger 7 times. And those 7 times are all in Revelation 2 and 3, where you have to the messenger of the church of Ephesus, write this. To the messenger of the church of Thyatira, write this. And it could be that in those uses, in those 7 letters to the 7 churches that Christ himself is dictating to John as he writes those letters, could be that those messengers are the ministers or the pastors of the church who bring the message of God to the individual churches. And so it's kind of written to them as they have that responsibility to convey the word of God, and that's where the change has to come from, through their leadership as under shepherds or whatever. So that might be what that means there. Not to spend a great deal of time on that, but just kind of pointing out this idea of a messenger, one who takes something from God and brings it to somebody else. Gabriel is the one that immediately comes to mind as an angel, right? He's appearing to Daniel several times in the book of Daniel. He comes to Zacharias, who's in the temple, to tell him that he's going to be the father of John the Baptist. And then a little later in the same chapter, he appears to Mary, and he identifies himself as Gabriel in all these places. So that's why we know it's the same guy. And so he's doing this messenger job. It's more like the word angel is a job description rather than a type of being, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah.
There's a heavenly being who's doing the job of being a messenger to take God's message here and there. In fact, when he's talking to Zacharias in chapter 1, Gabriel says, "I stand at the throne of God." You get this impression that he's there waiting for God to tell me to go take this message. And so, just to deliver this message. So, but the cherubim or seraphim, we never see them. We don't see them much in the Bible anyway. We kind of looked at most of the places, if not all of the places where they appear. But you never see them doing the work of messengers. Like we said, one's a guardian, the other's a worshiping. But many of the heavenly beings, I think, do serve in that capacity. And there's probably a gazillion other things that they do. We see sometimes some beings in the Bible doing some interesting things. And there's some descriptions of those beings, and it's really kind of strange what they look like. But one of the things that when you try to imagine what, in some ways, what exactly is heaven like, right? And one of the verses or passages that help me to think about the host of heaven is found in 2 Kings 6:17. In that part of Scripture, that's where the prophet Elisha is. He figures into this. The king of Syria has it in for Elisha because Elisha keeps prophesying ahead of time what the king is going to do next, and he gets pretty upset with who's leaking this information to Elisha out of my cabinet here or whatever, and nobody, none of us are doing this. This is just Elisha and his God. So one day the Syrian king shows up, or at least his men do, and surround where Elisha is living, right? And in the morning, Elisha's servant goes out like he normally would to get some water or something, and he sees this army surrounding them. And he comes back and tells Elisha, we're done for. The Syrian army is all around us. And then Elisha prays and he says, "Oh Lord, please open up my servant's eyes so that he might see." So the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. We don't have to worry, we're being protected. I see that there's a hierarchy. Yeah, there is a hierarchy. We read about that in Colossians and Ephesians, a hierarchy of angelic beings. It's a good observation there. So these angels, but it's interesting in this passage here, it says the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire. Now we can presume that those chariots have charioteers, but it doesn't mention them. It's just, but it talks about horses with chariots. Horses are in the heavenly realm. That's kind of wild to think about. What is a heavenly horse like? When Christ comes, when he returns, he's riding on a white horse. And then there's the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse too. So these horses are apparently part of heaven, and you begin to wonder, you know, well, I think about all the varieties of the kind of life that are on this planet. It's just innumerable, the things from, you know, in the seas and the oceans. You know, I'm just looking at some pictures earlier this week about these really weird things found deep in the Mariana Trench out, you know, off of Japan or whatever, or China, up in that part of the world anyway. And just things way down deep that never come up for light. And they have lights themselves, which is rather fascinating.
Yeah.
You know, this bioluminescence or whatever. But I think about how all this that God powerfully created. So if he did all that here for us to see and experience and find, and we're still finding things, which is amazing. Would God, when he comes to populating heaven, would he just use kind of a cookie cutter approach, you know, to stamp out angels that all look the same or something? You know, and you know, all tall blonde Nordics, right? They're just all standing around. George Carlin once quipped, he said, "There's far too many blondes in heaven." So, I thought that was pretty good. But I don't think it's like that. It's the variety. God is a God of variety with the kind of things that he makes. I wonder what all is there that, you know, it's part of that heavenly realm. You have the host of heaven. What are the hosts?
Yeah.
I hear you, Deb. How wonderful heaven must be, and what is waiting for all of us there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
it'll be beautiful no matter what.
Yeah. It's just amazing to think about.
Yeah. Now, I was also thinking of the two angels who came to Lot in Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's...
And they were described as being good-looking, beautiful, apparently.
That's a fascinating story because they come at first with, actually the Lord himself comes in the form of an angel, along with these two. So three of them show up at Abraham's tent.
Okay, yeah.
And he fixes them a meal. You know, that's another thing I think we get confused about. We hear that it talks about angels being ministering spirits in the Bible. And so that we can call this a spiritual realm, but it's not like Casper, you know, this, you know, where he eats something and it falls out of his stomach because there's nothing to hold it, you know, or whatever's going on there. It's cartoon. I don't know. But these creatures actually, they sit down and they eat a meal. God and the two angels, they eat what Abraham fixes, and then they go to Sodom to get Lot and his family out. And you have these men that are there. Of course, they desire to have these two in a sexual way, and they're stricken with blindness. Then, well, I don't want to get ahead of the story, but did they know they were angels? Could they tell that they were angels? Is there something that, well, I'm going to get ahead of the story if I do that. So I'll just hold that thought. And if we should have time, we'll come back to that a little bit later here as we begin to talk about these Nephilim and the whole story there.
Yeah. Twisted says, in the Bible, horses have multiple meanings, including strength, war, wealth, and judgment.
Yeah, and that seems to fit, doesn't it, with the four horsemen, those four qualities. You have the white horse that comes in, and the rider comes, but he's got a bow, but he doesn't have any arrows. It's like he's kind of a threat, but there's nothing to him or something like that. It's an evil person, I think, that's coming in on that. And then you have the red horses of war, and And then there's also judgment, I think, is found in, like, there's sickness in the one, and then death, of course, the angel of death on the last horse, and just talking about God's judgment and so forth. So anyway, well, the woman's holding scales, and talked about the high price of eggs or something. No, that's what we talk about. The high price of oil and wheat, right, and so forth. These Nephilim are the real fascinating aspects of what we want to talk about tonight. I think is Nephilim aren't wholly or completely, not holy either necessarily, but in two terms of the words, I guess, WHOLLY kind. They're not wholly heavenly beings. They're part human, and they are not holy either. They are from an evil source, and that's what we get into in Genesis chapter 6. Genesis 6:4 says that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God, which are heavenly beings, went to the daughters of human and had children by those women. They were the heroes of old. They were the men of renown, it says here. So these Nephilim, what are we talking about here? I'm going to spend a little time. This might start sounding a little technical here, so I don't know how it'll play, but I've got it in my notes. We might as well do it, and just hang in there with me, and we'll get past this and get on to something else shortly. But this word Nephilim is kind of interesting. Again, you have a word here. The version I read from up there was the New International Version, and when they did their translation, they just left it as Nephilim. They didn't try to translate it into something else. In the King James Version, there were giants in the earth in those days.
Yeah.
And so in a number of translations use that, but they just kept the Hebrew word, spelled it out anglicized way in English. So the word Nephilim is, of course, with that I am ending. It's an actually Hebrew word. A number of Bible teachers will say that this word Nephilim comes from a Hebrew root word, which is a verb, and the word is pronounced Naphal, and the English spelling is Naphal, Naphal, which means to fall or to fall down, is what that word means. And so these are fallen ones.
Okay.
That's what many teachers say, but I found a different take on this. And in this book that I have here it's going to be backwards on the screen.
No, it's showing all right.
It's showing right? Okay. It looks goofy on mine, but everything else okay for you. So Fallen. And this is written by Tim Chaffee. And a very kind of a thick book, but it's a good book on the sons of God and the Nephilim. And he does a good study on that. He actually works out at the Ark in Kentucky.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Although he will say that my book does not represent necessarily the view of Answers in Genesis, the ministry. He made sure he made that distinction. This is published by a different company. It's not published by the Answers in Genesis people, but they liked him out there, so I'm sure it's okay.
I wrote it down, so
okay, all right.
Be looking that one up.
yeah. I think to me it's the best book from a biblical point of view on the subject of the Nephilim and this whole thing.
I was able to pick this one up.
Oh, okay. Cherubim. Okay, there you got your angels with a bunch of wings.
Yeah.
Oh, Josh Peck. Yeah, I know. I've interacted with Josh online and stuff a couple times, and been a few years, but had some good discussions with him. I like his take on things. He's a bright guy. Tim is he's was responsible, I think, especially at the Ark, for a lot of the displays. Have you ever been to the Ark out there?
Not yet.
Okay.
On my bucket list, my sister and I.
Yeah, it's worth the trip. It really is amazing. When you see just walking up and you see the size of that thing, it just, you can't describe it. It's like, it's incredible how big it is.
Well, it's supposed to be true to size,
Right.
biblically. Although, how were they able to figure out what a
Cubit.
cubit? Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. There's two cubits. It is a known figure.
Mhm.
There's two uses of cubit. There's a standard cubit that's 18 inches. Typically, it was from the tip of a man's finger to the elbow.
Okay.
I measured mine. I think it is kind of close. Well, maybe it's shrinking now that I'm getting older, but when I measured it years ago, it was 18 inches. So, but it'd be bigger if I could do that. But anyway, never mind. But then there's a royal cubit as well. And I think that is 22 inches, if I remember right, something like that. And that's the one they used for the ark. So, that's kind of what's he worked out there on these displays. And it's kind of interesting. We were going through, and we're coming up. Oh, there we go. Septuagint translators use the Greek word gigantes. Right. I actually have that in my notes. So you're jumping ahead of me, little twisted, but you're not twisted at all. You're doing fine. Unless I'm twisted, then we're both that way. The gigantes translates the Hebrew word Nephilim in Genesis 6 as that. Gigantes also refers to the Titans, the legendary giants from Greek mythology who were destroyed. Yeah, I think that's where these Hercules and Zeus and all of these different ones. Of course, the Titans, Hercules was not one of the Titans, but the Titans do come out of that whole
mythology.
Thing.
Yeah.
Hercules could be a kind of Nephilim in a sense because he was considered to be part of heaven and part of human. His mother was human, but I think Zeus was his father, if I remember right. And there's several persons in that mythology that way. And I don't know that those stories were true in any way, shape, or form. However, do they reflect a truth that was further back, which is what we're talking about here? Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to think. We're trying to keep an eye on the time, but we're still pretty good.
Yeah. Hey, if it takes 3 hours, it'll take 3 hours. It doesn't matter.
I will fall asleep if it's going to take 2 more hours from now. No, but no, I won't. But in his book anyway, Fallen, Tim Chaffee says this. He says the Hebrew language. We talked about Nephal being to mean that's where the word Nephilim comes from.
Yeah.
He doesn't think it's that word. That there's another root word that must be involved or something. But Nephal doesn't work. And here he explains why it doesn't work. He says the Hebrew language follows largely predictable patterns, rules of grammar, basically, right? And when a verb is used as the basis for a participle, the fallen sounds like a noun, but the word fall is, of course, a verb. So it's the fallen ones, the ones kind of implied there, right? So it's used, it's kind of taking a verb and using it as a noun or whatever. So to turn Nephal into the active participle, meaning those who actually fall, which some people I've done that on ice a couple of times in my life. I hope I don't do it again. But I've fallen downstairs. We all fall. We've all had falling times.
Yep.
The 2-year-old, she falls all the time. The good thing for her is she doesn't have that far to fall, so she bounces right back up. But anyway, so those who fall, that's an active faller, right? The word would become, actually, when you change it into to make it say that, it's no Nephilim, which is not the same. It's got an O in there and it's got an E in place of the E and the I. The first 2 vowels are different. Okay. He says, so doing it for the active, he says the first and second vowels are different than the first 2 vowels in Nephilim. So Nephal doesn't really work. It becomes this Nephilim when you do it according to the rules, right?
Okay.
And Nephilim does appear in the Bible, he says in Ezekiel 32:27, referring to warriors who were slain in battle. So they fell. They were the fallen ones who died. And then they went to Sheol. So they went to the place of the dead. And then he says, turning Nephal, that Naphal word, into a passive participle, those who have fallen. It's kind of a something that has happened to someone, rather than those who actively fall. It would yield the word, okay, this one is Nephilim with a U in there. And again, the second vowel is different there. So you can't take Nephal and get Nephilim out of it when you follow Hebrew grammar, is what he's saying.
Right, right.
And so fallen ones is not really an accurate term, right? I think, along with what a little twisted said about the gigantes in the Septuagint, that's a Greek translation of the Old Testament text, from Hebrew to Greek. It's in my notes here a little bit. We'll get to it then a little bit later. In Genesis 6:4, the fallen ones, really, if you want to have any fallen ones at all there, it's the sons of God.
Yeah.
They fell. They left their position. They fathered Nephilim by the human women. They rebelled against God, and so thus they are fallen heavenly beings. The book, you could say fallen angels. We could use that term. We know what we're talking about there, I think. Yeah. The book of Jude talks about them, and he calls them angels, actually. In Jude 1, verses 6 and 7, and the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode. Oh, by the way, this is fascinating to me, because here we have a New Testament reference to what's happening in Genesis 6. That's what he's talking about here. And this whole thing that happened there was very important to those people that lived in the New Testament times, in that first century and so forth, and leading up to that for a couple centuries. This whole account was very involved in what they studied and learned. All the apostles knew about this. Peter talks about it in his two books, his two letters. And Jude is right along there with it. Jude is a half brother to Jesus, actually. He's the son of Joseph and Mary. And he writes this. He says, the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but they left their own abode, God has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. Okay. And then he talks about Sodom and Gomorrah, which we mentioned earlier. He says, as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, in a similar manner to these angels. Okay. Right. Having given themselves over to sexual immorality and gone after strange flesh. And, that's those men in Sodom going after these two angelic beings. In Genesis 6:4, you have these angels going after human beings. Yeah. Did the guys in Sodom look back to what happened in Genesis 6 and decided they wanted to experience that for themselves? And here's two angels walking in the gates. Yeah. I made the angels mad. Don't get angels mad. We already talked about that. Don't mess with them. I don't know. These guys just kind of forgot about everything, and they ended up blind. But they didn't have to be blind for long, because then their whole city was destroyed. Right. So, the book of Enoch talks a lot about all of these things. In fact, Jude, in his book, he quotes from the book of Enoch. And talks about Enoch the seventh from Adam, which is his order in Genesis chapter 5 in genealogy there. There's Adam is number 1, and you go all the way down 7, and there's Enoch. He's the 7th one in that line. Right. So anyway, so Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, they went after strange flesh. They're set forth as an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. So talking about judgment, Jude is kind of comparing this to false teachers is what he's doing, but he draws on that example, which is seems so radical, like wow, why is he going over there? But they talked about this all the time in that time period, and people would have known the accounts and everything. It's rather interesting. But talking about that at the first there, those who do not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode. The sons of God in Genesis 6 did not hold on to their proper realm, the place for which they were created, that heavenly realm created for angelic beings, for heavenly beings to dwell in. They left that. They did not hold their position of power that they had there. So they didn't keep their proper domain. The word is actually arche, A-R, well, it's Alpha Rho key, I think, and then there's a epsilon, I believe, is the one at the end. So there's arche is the word. It says the first place or power, sovereignty, dominion, command. They had such a high place over everything. And I see we got another comment down here. In First Enoch, which is usually when you talk about the book of Enoch, there's two other ones that probably Enoch didn't write, but Enoch may well have written the first Enoch book. So the one sometimes called the book of Enoch. I think it's sometimes you have them all in one big volume, but the first 36 chapters would be First Enoch, or the ones that Enoch most likely wrote. Obviously, he must have written some of it because Jude quotes from that, and he attributes it to that Enoch, right? So anyway, so in First Enoch, God gave Nephilim 500-year lifespan and made civil war against each other so that the watchers, their parents, would watch them kill each other. Yeah, this talks about the whole thing happening before the flood. And it seems to expand. If Enoch wrote that, it's probably information that is good unless it's been changed by somebody. It's not, First Enoch is not in the Bible. You don't find it there.
Right.
And so it's not under that inspiration we talked about at the beginning, but I find it to be a very useful book when we talk about things like this. So appreciate what's coming up here for some of your folks. They're in on this. So so these angels, they left their abode, they left their habitation. And the word for habitation their abode is in the version I was reading from. It's called it's habitation in the King James. They left their own habitation. The Greek word is oikoterion. It comes in part from one word, oikos, which means house. Okay. We get our word economy from that.
Oh.
How you run your household. Oiko, it comes from the same word. It's how you run your household, right? Oikos, your house. But terion is added on there. It's a dwelling place. It's a habitation is what it means. Orkaterion is also used. This is interesting in 2 Corinthians 5:2. And it says there, and you're probably familiar with this passage if you've been around the Bible enough. For in this we groan, Paul says, earnestly desiring to be clothed with our habitation, which is from heaven. Deborah was doing that a little bit ago. I can't wait to see what is going to be there. I want to be there, right? And see what that's like. And I totally get that. We're desiring to be clothed with our habitation, our body, our heavenly body, that we'll have at that time, that redeemed body that Christ has gained for us in his own body. It's pretty amazing stuff. So we're really talking about these angels leaving their body and taking on a different form. And then they have relations with human women and produce offspring. So it's really it's hard to get your head around, but it seems to be plainly there, not only in the Old Testament, but also with help from the New Testament. We start to understand these things. Very interesting.
Yeah, between those and along with the non-canonical texts also, you got to you got to refer to them all.
Yeah, it can be helpful. I'm be careful with the the non-canonical ones, obviously, and like the Jasher and I think there's a Book of Giants, I believe, is one, and Jubilees is another. Jubilees is kind of an interesting book. It's a retelling of Genesis, and it kind of records it with that idea of Jubilee years. and everything. So it's kind of interesting how it's written. So it's only, but this word orchiterion is only used in these two places in the Bible that we looked at. Jude 1, which is only one chapter, verse 6, and then 2 Corinthians 5:2. And they both use it as a heavenly habitation, the bodies we want to have and the kind of bodies that they actually left to come down to earth. Very interesting. They got on a different body, but I want to stress too, though, that these angels did not take on human bodies. They didn't become human. I think that's important to point out. They just, some kind of change happened in their bodies. We even talked about that a little bit, or inferred that back in Genesis, when we were in Genesis 3, how when they sinned, there was a big change.
Yeah.
They had a different kind of body. Even though they were on earth, they had a different form. And then after they covered themselves with leaves because they realized they were naked.
Right.
And it wasn't like they were really dumb beforehand and didn't know. I think there was something about their form that did provide covering for that. Maybe that glory kind of thing we were talking about with the one angel, the light coming out. Maybe they were clothed in a kind of light. And then when they sinned, the light went out, so to speak. So anyway, again, it's kind of speculation, but it's makes a certain kind of sense, I guess.
Yeah, that does in a way. Yeah.
So, isn't it fascinating how all these different things tie together too? You know,
Right.
That's another thing about the Bible is just amazing. It's just all you could see all these things coming together. It's very interesting. Don't get me started. 4 hours. We're going for 4 hours tonight. No, just
All
kidding.
right.
Nobody has to do anything tomorrow anyway. The sons of God in Genesis 6 may have taken on earthly bodies for the express purpose, actually, of starting families through human women. But they didn't take on human bodies. They had bodies that were suited to earth, but doesn't mean that they were human beings. We talked about the angels eating food. It's possible that they could change when they adapt themselves to a different environment, if I could put it that way. But it's not a permanent change, but they could partake of things here.
Right.
These guys made a permanent change when they made their decision. If this is what you want, God says this is what you will be. And then that basically happens. They left their bodies in their proper place and changed completely. Anyway, so here's the whole 4 verses that really is the central Nephilim passage back in Genesis 6. It says in verses 1-4, now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, there was a population explosion. All right. There was probably at the time of the flood, it's estimated, conservative estimate is about 1 billion people living on the earth at the time of the flood.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. There's a work I read from Henry Morris and the other guy, John, oh man, can't think of his last name now, but it's called the Genesis. The Genesis Flood is the book that they wrote together that kind of kicked off the whole creationist movement back in the 60s. Okay. And in there, they make this estimate. They say if you allow 6 children for every generation that you have recorded in chapter 5, where they give the long ages, these guys living for hundreds of years and so forth. And you just keep multiplying that out and just exponentially. By the time you get down to the last 2 generations, Noah's and then maybe Lamech's, I guess, his father, that's about 1 billion people with everything that's happened all the way down through. And it's just do the math, basically.
Right.
And they were really conservative about that because obviously they probably had, if you're living that long, you're probably healthier for a lot longer. You probably have children a lot longer too.
Yeah.
And you probably have 50 children, maybe more. Who knows?
Think about Sarah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So she was able to have them later. So maybe it reflected back to that. I don't know. Just this is what happens in my brain. It's amazing that my mouth slows everything down because I have to.
Well, and then getting a little off the subject too. That that billion that kind of explains the ancient structures that are found around the world.
Yes,
The,
yes.
the extremely ancient structures.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, especially I think of someplace like Göbekli Tepe is one that's been recently discovered within the last 40 years or something like that, and kind of come to public notice within the last 10 or 15 or more. But I don't know that it's as old as they say it is. I have to go with what the Bible says, but nonetheless, I think it's a pre-flood thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Oh, Rephaim. Well, that would be. Yeah, that's an interesting subject. There's two different ways you could go about that. You can go about that as being the Rephaim representing the dead, or the Rephaim that is the tribe of the Rephaim in Israel, which is a giant tribe. So I'm not sure which one you're thinking about there, a little twisted, but
that along with the Anakim, the tribe of Goliath.
Right. Yep. So, but we may get to that sometime, but I don't really have the Rephaim in the notes tonight, but it did come up. In fact, I think actually with that quote from the book Fallen by Tim Chaffee, I kind of took some of that out, didn't do the whole quote, but in the middle of there, he talks about Rephaim there. So there, it's all in the same topic area, so subject area. So yeah, it's interesting. Anyway, looking at this passage, now it came to pass that the daughters were born to them, they multiplied, and the daughters were born. So you have lots of young women, and the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair or beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. So they're marrying these women. And I don't know if they married more than one woman or how that was, but that precedent was set by a guy named Lamech back in chapter 4, where he marries 2 wives. He takes Ada and Zillah. So he had wives from A to Z. Why can't everybody else? So anyhow, and the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. And I think at that point, it's 120 years until the flood judgment comes. That's how I see that. Some people say that they're only going to live for 120 years after that, but some of them exceeded that. Abraham was 175. So I don't know if the 120 is about their longevity as so much as it is about 120 years until the flood comes.
Yeah.
So then verse 4 says, this is the New King James Version, and it says here, there were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. And I think that is talking about the mighty men of old, men of renown. That looks at the mythology, like the Greek mythology and some of the other mythologies in Egypt and Babylon and Samaria and all these places, ancient places, all comes out of some of this. These particular sons of God were former dwellers of that unseen realm, and they rebelled against God when they desired to come to earth to take human women as wives and to have families. And the offspring of these odd couples, that they were the Nephilim. That's where the Nephilim come from. They were hybrid beings, half earthly, half heavenly. And here the New King James Version translates the word Nephilim as giants. And this is where I got, now I've caught up with a little twisted here. And this is where the Septuagint comes in. About 200 years before the birth of Christ, the Hebrew Old Testament texts were translated into Greek by Jewish scholars who lived in Alexandria, Egypt. Alexandria had a big library that was destroyed at one
Yeah.
time, and many books were lost. Of course, they were all on scrolls. There's a kind of a neat quote I read somewhere that comes actually from that time. A librarian who worked at Alexandria, and he was talking about, of course, they were, like I say, they were scrolls, and his quote basically says, "A big book is a big nuisance." But you got to carry this huge scroll everywhere. Keep it simple, okay?
Now they're, going off of that,
Yeah.
all the Dead Sea Scrolls that have been found hidden
Oh,
away.
yeah, that's incredible.
You
That's the
wonder,
find it.
all you can do is hope that some of those from the Library of Alexandria, has been hidden away.
Yeah, they might find. Well, they find some things. There's been some things found in Egypt, the Coptic scrolls and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Maybe some of that comes out of that. I'm sure the copies that are found there probably did have copies in the Alexandrian library,
Right.
or something like that. But yeah, it would be cool to find some of this stuff. And then sometimes I think maybe it's best we don't know. So.
No.
Yeah, you want to because of the curiosity, but maybe
Yep.
Then you get that Pandora's box story, and so there you are. Maybe leave it shut, man. Don't be opening that. No. Anyway, so what had happened in Jewish culture, of course, Alexander, for whom Alexandria is named, obviously, and a lot of other cities were named after him, conquered much of the known Western world at that time in an amazing amount of time, in just like 11 years. It's just incredible to think. He only lived to be 32, I believe, and died of a sickness. But he had conquered so much, did so much. Because of that, Greek became the common language all over the empire. Just kind of like English is a very common language around the world today. And so Hebrew, for the Jews at that time, kind of became more like a classical language. Nobody was speaking it anymore, kind of like Latin would be for us or something, that just, people know some Latin things, but they're mostly scholars or lawyers or doctors or whatever. So the translating the Hebrew scriptures into Greek made it available for the common people. And also that paved the way for the New Testament as well.
Yeah.
So when God initiated the writing of the New Testament, you had all the roads built by the Romans so they could get the word out. And it was in the common language of the people at the time. Everybody was still pretty much speaking Greek in a common way. So pretty fascinating how God works things out through history. So anyway, so they translated their Old Testament into this Septuagint. And that means, I think, the 70. And I think the tradition says that 70 scholars in Alexandria actually worked on that. Let's see, we had 200 brand new Bibles brought into work today, along with children's Bible storybooks. We give them out to anyone who wants one. Oh, that's cool. Awesome.
Wow. Fantastic, Hillary.
Get it out there.
Yes.
Yeah, you can even drive in a car on those Roman roads now to get it out. So that's good. That's good. Thank you for sharing that. So in the Greek version of the Genesis 6:4, it says, as Little Twisted put out here before, it says, now giants were upon the land in those days, and after that, whenever the sons of God visited the daughters of humans. So it didn't just happen once.
Yeah.
It happened later too.
Yeah.
It says also after that, and that's where we get that tribe of giants and Goliath and all that. Right. Comes out of that. The sons of God visited the daughters of humans. They fathered children for themselves. Those were the giants who were from long ago, the people of renown. So very similar to what we read earlier, but it takes that word Nephilim and says giants. It's giants. That's what that really means. So they saw it as giants. And then, like the word that you had mentioned earlier, the Greek word is gigantes, which means giants or mighty men. So in the time right before Christ, the Jewish understanding of Genesis 6:4 was the Nephilim were giants. And that's kind of important to point out because you get, and it stays that way through the first century, the second century, into the third century. Everyone's interpreting this as it's just giants. They just know that it's giants.
Mm-hmm.
When you get to like the fourth century, there were a couple of scholars who came along in the Christian church who, because people were worshiping angels, because they got too much speculation in there and they weren't following what the scripture said, like we talked about earlier, and they began to worship angels. A lot of people began to say, no, these sons of God were not angels. They're the sons of Seth. Yeah. They descended from that line. And then you have but these daughters of Cain, they were the girls on the wrong side of the tracks in town. You know, you went down to the gutter to pick up these women, you know, kind of thing, because they were the sons of Cain, you know, and that became the story. And because I think it was the one Augustine taught that in his book, The City of God. And that became such a well-known standard volume on understanding the Bible that idea just was carried throughout. And that's what I learned. And when I was growing up, that's what the pastor in the church I was at, that's what he believed and taught. And that was you're probably familiar with the Schofield Reference Bible.
Yes.
Yeah, very much. You know, you couldn't be a Baptist and not have one.
Yep.
So
I still have one.
Okay, look in the notes. He talks about this they were sons of, well, you know, then. So yeah. So anyway, so this idea of them being giants, because that's a hard thing to figure out. How is it that one human being with another human being produces an aberration like a giant? That's kind of hard to put together, you know, for what it says in the scripture. So, but that's how that got so confounded and confused. So anyway, now I got off my notes here somewhere. But Goliath, we talked about, you mentioned him a little bit ago. You have a lot of these beings showing up after the flood. And when Moses sent interesting thing about Goliath, since we have a little bit of time, he lost his head, right? I read this just about a year ago or something on when David David picks up 5 stones. He kills Goliath with one because he knows he's only going to get one chance, but he's that good. So he of course God helps him and he takes out him with there's 4 other stones left. Goliath has 4 brothers. Okay. And they're all giants too. He didn't know if he'd have to deal with more of them after he kills their brother, right? Which he didn't under the circumstances. But he takes the sword, he cuts off Goliath's head, and most likely he held it up, to see, because they were all standing off at a distance. Nobody wanted to get close to this giant, right? And he holds it up and shows everybody that he's killed their champion. And what he probably did, which was common, he probably put that head on display somewhere so that it could be seen. And it's very interesting that Goliath was from Gath, Goliath of Gath. Yeah. You mess around with the letters a little bit, it's not hard to get Golgotha, the place of the skull.
Oh. Wow.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
Yeah. It could be that place of the skull was where Goliath. I mean, there's places over there that sort of look like a skull, and there's one place in particular that does, and maybe that's what it's for too. But maybe that's where he decided to put this up on display.
Yeah, very possible, huh? Interesting.
It gets fascinating because you have this passage then when after Jesus is put in the tomb, he goes down into the earth to where the spirits are. He preaches to the spirits that are down there. And I know we're getting some questions here and everything. Oh, okay. This is Cryptid Search. Says, any thoughts on how or if the Nephilim survived the flood? Okay, we're kind of talking about that right now, so that kind of falls in line. I've heard that theory, and it is tempting to think that okay, one of the things that happened, this gets me moving along a little bit, when this takes place, where these sons of God come down to these daughters of men, they're introducing new genetic material to the human race.
Right.
And it's not human. So the genetic material of these offspring obviously is producing something, an aberration, like we said.
Yeah.
And but then how far does this spread? Not just, you have quarter Nephilim, you have eighth, you know what I'm saying, is how far does this get spread from beyond, and how much corruption happens in the population of humans before the flood?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll get back to that.
Yeah.
It's tempting to think that maybe and some people believe what you're saying here, that the Nephilim survived the flood somehow and got in. Now, some people will say that the Nephilim got in underground and they didn't drown in the flood and were killed in the flood. I personally don't believe that, because those people were horrible. They were destroying each other before they were set on killing one another as they fought for dominance in the land. And so I don't think that they survived the flood. They wouldn't have survived if God didn't send the flood.
Right.
So I don't know that actually happened. One other possible way would be if someone who was on the ark was carrying Nephilim DNA, and that one of the daughters there might have had that.
Okay.
But there's even something that we're going to talk about later that dispels that notion for me. That's a good point. The only way to kill Nephilim was to chop the head off. That could very well be that's what they had to do to kill these things. That's what I heard. In fact, when I heard about what I said about Golgotha, the Epic of Gilgamesh, that's mentioned in there. That's a Sumerian work, I believe, if I remember right. But so anyway, but there are definitely Nephilim after the flood. I think there was another incursion, because the Bible says, like we read up here, now the giants were upon the land, and also in those days, and also after those days, later days.
Yeah.
Whenever the word is, the sons of God visited the daughters of humans, before and also after, whenever that happened. Not to the extreme like it did before the flood, but it still seems to have happened after the flood.
Along with whatever DNA was passed along, possibly among one of
one of Noah's daughters-in-law or something.
Right.
Could possibly be that, but I don't think so. And I'll kind of get into that in a little bit, because of what God, I think, is doing with this whole flood and judgment and everything else, why the judgment is sent and so forth. When Moses sent 12 spies into the promised land of Canaan, 10 of them came back saying, we can't take the land because everybody there is stronger than we are. We saw the giants there, the Nephilim. The word Nephilim is actually used in that passage, the descendants of Anak, the Anakim you talked about.
Okay, let me interrupt you for 1 second.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
2 seconds. Take 2 seconds.
You said that, that the Nephilim, that they mated with human women again at another time, a later date.
I kind of, you mean like the fallen angels, the sons of God?
Yes.
Yeah, the sons of God. Yeah.
Now, what do you have a note in your note which book and verse that is?
that's the catch of that. This is kind of a speculation thing, kind
Okay.
of thing. Like a lot of these ideas that we're seeing, they're
Right.
speculative,
Speculation. Okay.
and which it's sort of like take your favorite one,
Right.
as long as it fits, which one best fits the Bible
And
and
then
what the Bible
extrapolate from
says.
there.
Yeah, and you can hang on to that with a tenuous grip,
Yeah.
lightly, not too tightly, because we don't really know.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting, in the genealogy in chapter 10 of Genesis, you have Cush, who begets Nimrod,
Okay.
who became a mighty man.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting turn of phrase. Did he somehow genetically, was he able to be changed? Did he call on, this really starts getting out there in speculative world, but it's interesting that the Bible words it that way, that he became a mighty man in the earth and he had all these kingdoms and everything. It's very much like Nephilim, like some say he became a Nephilim.
Okay.
And possibly through supernatural workings, or what you might call magic or something like that, where they contact these spirits and somehow they're allowed to do something with him and start the whole thing over again. I don't know. That's, again, I'm not holding that hardly at all. It's just an interesting thought.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to say that's what happened. No, we don't know what happened.
Nope.
And it could be that it just doesn't talk about when the angels came again, and maybe it happened sporadically, rather than all at once, like it did in before the flood.
Yeah.
And I talked about a little bit about of course, the Sodom and Gomorrah and the men of Sodom, and that was sort of an idea they had in their mind. Oh, angels came, so maybe angels were coming and visiting. Maybe that was allowed for a while. I don't know. And but somehow you end up with giants, right?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting little thing of well, not little. It's an interesting idea about Satan. We didn't talk about him as a fallen angel,
Right.
and he was a cherub. It says in Ezekiel, "You were the anointed cherub who covers." And he says, "I established you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You were in God's presence. You were walking back and forth in the midst of the fiery stones," which is kind of neat. We're talking about fiery things and everything. Mm-hmm. "You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created until iniquity was found in you." So he was perfect, and then he fell. And he was in the garden of God. He was in Eden, the garden of God. It says that earlier. It says, "You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering." And then it lists several stones and so forth. "The workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you," which they say that's musical terms, that Satan is very involved in. Lucifer was very involved in music as an angel, as a worshiper, and everything by the throne of God there. So music becomes important to him in his fallen state too, leading people astray. And anyhow, that's another entirely different thought. But he was in Eden, the garden of God. Maybe he was in there before he fell, and that's how Eve was able to talk with him so casually, almost, in chapter 3, because she recognized who it was. But maybe he had fallen. And he says he was the anointed cherub who covers. And we talked about the cherubim on the Ark of the Covenant covering the mercy seat with their wings. Right. Kind of interesting that he falls in line with that. It goes down through here. In Genesis chapter 3, God says to Satan, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed," capital S in the version I'm reading, "and he shall crush your head, and you shall bruise his heel." That's the first mention of the gospel in the Bible. That's where the war starts. God declares war against Satan. He says, "I'm sending one who's going to undo what you have done. Going to destroy you and the works that you did." And it's an awesome passage, that to think that far back there at the very moment after human sin, God immediately brings this message of hope.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of interesting that Eve, when she has Cain, her firstborn, I've gotten a man from the Lord. What's she thinking? Is she thinking, this is the one?
It's one, yeah.
She doesn't know. It's the seed of the woman, and this is the first one. And
Mm-hmm.
I think there's more there than just, oh, look, I got a man from the Lord. I think, they knew what it was like, Adam and Eve, to be in paradise. They knew what they had lost more than any of us understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
And their hope was now placed on their children, and somewhere this one's going to come. They don't know when.
Right.
They don't know that it's 4,000. Made. Yeah. And he's going to get us out of this, Adam. Yeah. Mm-hmm. and so she, in pain, but she has now a childbirth. Of course, she didn't have any children before, so she didn't have anything to compare that to. But she brings forth this son, and it was in pain. I mean, that would take her back to what was spoken to her in the garden. Mm-hmm. And now it's a man, the seed. This is it. Of course, Cain was a big letdown. And I've even wondered about that. Did they have high expectations of him because of all this? And that kind of, when he didn't live up to them and sinned just like they did Adam get mad and at his son and, tell him off, say things that he shouldn't say, et cetera, et cetera? And
that would be logical and
kind of drove him. Yeah, kind of drove him in a different direction. I mean, you have this thing where boys especially seem to want to impress their dad with what they do. And so it depends on me. I've got to show dad that I'm. So he brings, look at all the vegetables I bring to the offering for the Lord that I grew myself, mm-hmm. which didn't fall in line with what God wanted. So there's, I don't know. Again, I'm speculating, but it's if I were going to make a movie, that's how the plot would go. Abel's just sitting around keeping sheep. There's no work in that, which is not true, but he's out there gardening, right? Sweat of his brow and all that stuff that they were talking about. So anyway, yeah, pretty fascinating stuff. So God says he's going to destroy Satan. And I often think of the Grinch when I get to this point, because the Grinch would say, I must stop Christmas from coming, right?
Yes.
And I think that's what Satan wants. He wants to stop the seed of the woman from coming.
Yeah.
And he does all these things, Herod, kills all the baby boys in Bethlehem in an effort to try to stop this one that now has been born. Satan is very much aware by that point who this is and what's going on. This is the one, right? And then, but you go back into Esther's time, and good night. Take care, Little Twisted. Thank you so much for your contributions. It really added a lot. So I hope I can come back again too. We'll have to see. I got to go through the hoops again. So but we'll see what happens.
Hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do. I have enjoyed it very much. I've been enjoying it very much.
Good.
Let's see. I was talking about Esther, how Haman was going to kill all of the Jews, and which would have stopped the Christ from coming.
Right.
And Esther, of course, steps in and turns things around. Say that will also mean me, and that gets the king up off his throne, and then they put Haman on the things he had prepared to hang and kill Mordecai.
Yep.
So, and then it just goes back. Moses, the Hebrew midwives were told by the pharaohs, the population of Israel was just growing by leaps and bounds, and they were afraid that they were going to come in and take over Egypt. as supposedly those kings actually did. They were kings from the south that came up and worked their way in. It was an invasion of migrants from the south. I know we don't know anything about what that's like, but this is what happened. And they came into the land and took over and became kings. They began to rule. And so they feared the same thing was now going to happen with these people in Goshen, come down from the north and basically take over. So they kill all the male children. Now that's their thinking, and that's their rationale.
Yeah.
But you know what Satan's thinking? Got to stop these descendants of Abraham because they have that promised land up there.
Mm-hmm.
And up in the promised land, what is Satan doing? He's creating giants.
Okay. Yeah.
And so when they come in, there's all these giant tribes in there. It's kind of like in miniature what it was like before the flood.
Right.
Satan's not original. He keeps coming up with the same ideas and uses them again and again. But he's trying to stop this one from coming because he wants to be like God, right? I will be like the Most High. That's what he says when he rebels. And he wants to have his own kingdom. He wants to be like God. Interesting, too, he tells Adam and Eve, you'll be like gods if you take that fruit. Same thing. You'll know good from evil, right from wrong. Yeah. So anyhow, so there's this whole thing then of I believe Satan guided those sons of God and just tempted them in a sense. Doesn't say that anywhere in scripture. I just see him saying, wow, look at that woman. She's pretty, and pointing them in that direction. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. And or maybe persuaded them that this is how we have to do this so our kingdom remains intact. We have to stop these people. Yeah. We have to change. If he could change the genetics of all the human race, Christ could not come in a human body with human blood like Adam had when the first Adam had. The second Adam would not be able to correct that. It's right. Another way of keeping that from happening.
Yeah, the bloodline pure.
Mm-hmm. And that's what's interesting. Yeah. And that's where I think we find that, well, all of flesh was corrupted. Let me just pick it up with that. Genesis 6:11 and 12 says the earth was also corrupt before God. Again, this is obviously before the flood. Everything was corrupt and the earth was filled with violence. And we had that reference about, from I think the book of Enoch or one of them, where the children, the Nephilim, are killing one another and their parents are watching in horror. Their fathers seeing these children devour each other, basically. Mm-hmm. And it just became a totally violent time. But it was compounded, you see, by having these wicked creatures doing this. The earth was filled with violence. And so God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on earth. The flesh was corrupted. The most direct impact on the physical nature of these human beings during this period of history would clearly be the sons of God introducing their DNA into the human population gene pool. And that would corrupt the flesh. Mm-hmm. You'd have this human angelic hybrid population to one degree or another throughout the world. But it's interesting, right before those verses that I just read, you have verses 9 and 10, and it tells us about Noah and his heritage. This is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. So he's got a pure bloodline. Yeah. Which is tracked for us in Genesis chapter 5, mm-hmm. all the way from Adam down through Seth and on. That he has a perfect bloodline. He walked with God, and he begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. I think you have 8 people out of 1 billion people. 8 are the only ones who survive because they're the only ones who can carry that perfect bloodline along, so Christ could come and be our Savior. Right. I think that's just awesome.
Yeah, so that God's promise could be fulfilled.
Yes.
And God finds a way.
Yep. He's always got. Satan didn't see that one coming. That there was this guy who had a pure bloodline, and he escaped. and God destroyed everything. And it also does something. It's hard for us to imagine God destroying all these people in judgment. It's probably because we don't understand things fully. But with this added dimension to this, at least this is what it did for me. When I started to put some of this together and hear it from others and so forth, and put this whole picture into my head so I could kind of have it there. It's like, this explains why God, he was sorry he had made man, because look what happened. It says he says, I have to destroy all. They had to be destroyed.
Yeah.
The men, women, and children, because they were all carrying that corrupt gene that you could not allow to go into the future, because it would just continually manifest. So it's all destroyed. It's a bittersweet kind of moment. Sweet that he thought about all of us when he got Noah on that boat, and what he was doing for the future to save us. And yet, wow, all that loss of life and that destruction. Sin's an awful, awful thing. It's a little word, but it's just so damaging, so destructive. So
it is, and has been, and will be.
Yeah.
Until
that kind of completes what I was going to talk about, I guess. Well, I guess I could go into one more thing here, and we still have time before we hit a 2-hour mark. So,
yeah.
Jesus said this about his second coming, kind of to finish off the whole story. We've taken it from that through basically the cross, Golgotha, and all the way down. Jesus says about his second coming as he talks to his disciples. This is in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, where Jesus is teaching on the Mount of Olives. Talk about red letter editions. We talk about the Sermon on the Mount, the 3 chapters in Matthew, same book, from chapters 5, 6, and 7. And there's a lot of red letters in there, but then the second place that's in the Bible is Matthew 24 and 25, talking about the coming kingdom and the second coming after Christ has been rejected by Israel. And he knows that, his time is short. This is the teaching he gives. And it's just, I did a word count one time, just put it all in Microsoft Word and highlighted all the red parts in both passages. And there's nearly as many words in the Olivet Discourse as there are in the Sermon on the Mount.
Oh.
So if people ever try to say Christ ever talked about his second coming, oh, yes, he did. He definitely did. But in this passage, he says this towards the end of chapter 24, but of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, which is kind of interesting that he talks about them here, as we've been talking about tonight. Not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. And then he says, but as the days of Noah were, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man be. It's going to be the same. They're similar, right?
Yeah.
And then he says this, for as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage. Now, we ordinarily wouldn't think it when we read this here, but based on what we talked about tonight, and in that context, what is this marrying and giving in marriage that he's talking about? It's is it when the sons of God came and took the daughters of men as their wives?
Oh.
Because that's the kind of marriage that's happening then.
Okay. Wow.
So what are we talking about here when it's going to be like that? And he's making that reference. And I already said that the disciples were very familiar with the book of Enoch, and this whole scenario was part of their training.
Right.
When they were living up in Capernaum, they could see Mount Hermon, where the angels supposedly descended.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's mentioned in Enoch as well. And they could easily see that from the Sea of Galilee because it's a really high mountain. And there's a whole slew of things I could get into there with the Caesarea Philippi, and when Jesus takes his disciples up there in Matthew 16 and says, "Who do men say that I am?" And it's this big worship area for pagan worship. They worship Zeus there. They worship Pan, the god Pan there. They worship Augustus Caesar. They have a temple built up to him.
Wow.
And it's all these false gods. He takes them up there and asks them that question: "Who do men say that I am?" Some say you're one of the prophets. Some you're Jeremiah, or John the Baptist. And he says, "Who do you say?" "You're the Christ. You're the Son of the living God. You're the seed of the woman. You're the one." Peter says that. And there they are in the midst of all this pagan thing, right at the foot of Mount Hermon, where these gods came down. I was saying something about when Christ went down to the spirits in when he died. He went down and preached to the spirits in heaven, or in chains, I believe, or in darkness.
Yeah.
And those Nephilim, or those fallen angels, that's where they were sent. That's what Jude said, that they were locked in chains of darkness. He's not going down to preach to try to set them free from sin or something, or like it's humans down there. He's preaching to those angels, those fallen angels who are in prison. And he's saying, basically, you tried to stop me, but you didn't. I'm alive. I mean, it suddenly took that passage for me and made it come alive and make it make sense. It fits in the whole scenario.
Oh, okay.
And you tie that into what we just said about Caesarea Philippi and him asking, "Who do men say that I am?" I mean, where's Christ? What's his thinking? Where's he coming from in these questions? And so when he's here saying that they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and they didn't know until the flood came and took them all away. They didn't get it. And so also will the coming of the Son of Man be.
Well, there's all kinds of gene splicing and hybridizations going on, and
men wanting to be God, right?
Yeah, labs all over the world, hidden labs, secret labs.
Yep.
Doing.
Deep underground military bases, DUMBs, UMB, and this kind of thing is going on. You've probably heard the story about men bragging to God that they're just as powerful as He is now, and they can make men for themselves. Like, we can make our own man.
Well, it's like CERN.
And so God says, "Well, go ahead, go ahead." And so He says they go out and they start to get their chemicals together and everything. And He says, no, wait a minute. You have to go get your own dirt. That's the dirt I made. Not quite like He did.
Yep.
And I think that kind of thing is happening today, like you're saying.
Yes,
here's an interesting.
Opening up all kinds of dimensions.
Oh my goodness. Oh yeah. What you mean? You're taking, opening up a portal of some kind.
Yeah.
To what? And they're trying to do it, and they have that goddess or god Kali or whatever, the god of chaos is outside of their
right in the lobby of their main building.
Yeah. Yep. There, and then of course, the Denver airport. So you have all kinds of, they have wild horses going on. Yeah. Okay, now here's an interesting question for you, Mary. And this gets a little bit speculative. We hear so much, of course, in the Bible about the mark of the beast, chapter 13 of Revelation and so forth. And a lot of prophecy teachers talking about this and trying to figure out what it could be. You need this to buy or sell, to run the oikonomos, the economy on the earth, right? And what's the mark going to be? Will it be a tattoo of some kind with special digitized ink that can be read by a laser or something? Or will it be some kind of barcode like we used to think back in the 70s or 80s, I guess, when we started to see that being used?
Right.
Or an implanted chip, of course, has been one that's recently been done. But here's one. What if taking the mark of the beast is like a genetic marker? That the basic, something is taken in that totally changes human DNA. and that becomes the marker. You have this transhumanism where we get an upgrade, supposedly, that we take over our own evolution as it were,
Yeah.
and we become a higher rate. And if you want to be part of the better society,
It would have to be visible, though, because it says the mark on the forehead or on the hand.
right? Yeah, it will be in some way. Yeah, but maybe that's where they can put a tracker that oh yeah, he has the DNA. It shows up. She has that
Yeah.
change. You come on in. You're welcome.
Right.
I don't know. It's as it was in the days of Noah.
Right. Yeah. I've also read that, that's not something that that will happen to you unwillingly. That's something
You
you
choose.
in full knowledge.
Right.
What
Yeah.
exactly you are doing and what you are entering in.
Right. And you're giving up that at that point you can no longer go back to God, because there's no salvation for you in
Right.
Christ in that way.
Right.
You're deliberately choosing this because you want to help that kingdom win.
Right.
Okay. And sounds like we're starting to talk about our own political situation. Anyway, but I don't want to get too political, but these things picture things. I know anyway.
Yeah.
So, and so, because the belief is that if a person takes the mark of the beast, they can't be saved. There's no longer any redemption for them in that,
Yeah.
right? And so again, if the DNA is altered, does that render for that person Jesus' blood ineffective? Because they've now changed. Again, this is just out there speculation. I'm not saying that's the way it's going to be, because we won't know until the time comes.
Yeah.
It's in one sense, it's kind of useless to speculate about it too much, but I think we need to be prepared for anything too, in some ways. Although, my plan is that Armageddon out of here before it happens.
I pray that it'll be a pre-trib rapture. Yes.
Yeah, that's what I hold to. But what comes, and God is with us no matter what. And that's the important thing to keep in mind in all of this. So anyway, that's kind of wraps up what I have. If there's any questions or anything further,
I'm scrolling through here, and if anyone else has any questions or comments, let's see.
I know it's been a lot to take in.
Yeah. WF.
The World Economic Forum wants to track our carbon footprints. There we go. So let's change that for silicon. Maybe we'll be all right then. They can't find the carbon. I don't know. No, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
Here we go.
One of my thoughts on Bigfoot. Yeah. It's a very fascinating subject to me. I was telling Mary and we were chatting online a little bit before this in preparation, and said, when I was 11, I went to the local theater in town and saw the America's Abominable Snowman was playing as a short, along with another nature film, and I found out since then that was a film that Roger Patterson and some others helped to work on, to get out there, get the message out, and to show this footage. And I had no idea that this was going to be in there. I'm just listening to people talk about what they've seen in the footprints that they're casting and all that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden you see this thing walking, along this beachy area, this, dry riverbed or creek bed or whatever. And I'm 11 years old, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there are monsters, and of course since then it just lit a fire for me, Sandra, and so it's why I do have an interest in this topic. I mean, I don't know if you can, there you go.
Yep.
There he is, right? The fact is, when up at I had this mug with me when we were up at in 2018 up at the campground, Milton.
Milton Loop.
Yeah, campground,
Mm-hmm.
and they had one of these for sale there, and I thought, oh, I'm going to put this on my Yeti cup because it just makes sense. He's white and everything else, right?
Great.
So it was not this one; it was a smaller one. But that started to fall apart, so I ordered one, and then it was almost didn't fit on the cup. So I thought he's closer now than what he was. He moved in, you know. I'm getting way off track, Saunders. Sorry, but I think it's a real possibility. Where it comes from, where this creature comes from, I've heard people say that it could be a Nephilim kind of thing. Maybe. It's, again, in some of those non-canonical books we were talking about, like Enoch and Jasher, like Jasher in particular, talks about how the fallen angels that we're talking about, these sons of God, were experimenting with genetics. And it doesn't say genetics in that book because it's so old, of course, but they were taking animals and trying to do things with them and mix them around and so forth. Maybe something like that happens somewhere along the line, and that's where these things come from.
Yeah,
I don't really,
it sounds like, basically what they were doing was genetic manipulation and splicing.
Right. On. If you want to become like God, it's kind of getting to know how he did creation is a big part of that.
Right.
That's how, of course, we just made the joke about the scientists doing that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But again, it's them, I wanted this knowledge because knowledge is power. And, if I know this, I can run things. Elon Musk and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. It's a pattern. It's a pattern. So
there's just, so much in the world today that, it leads one to believe that, yes, we are in the last days.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, people have been saying that for the past 500 years. Yeah,
right. Peter has an interesting passage on that, right, in chapter 3 of his second epistle, where he says, in the last days, scoffers will come, saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they have since the beginning. Like, it's just always been that way, But he reminds them, he says, no, it hasn't always been the same.
Right.
And he talks about the flood, which we've been talking about tonight, at least referring to. And he says about how the whole world was flooded and was destroyed at that time. And he's, again, referring back to these same things that we're talking about and implying the whole thing that we've been talking about tonight. Mm-hmm. And saying it has not been the same. And that's where he says the day with the Lord is 1,000 years. So if we take that scale, like the cubits, right? If we take that scale, it's only been 2 days since Jesus ascended to heaven.
Yeah. Yep.
So, God's time, his time scale is definitely different than ours. So.
Yeah, and if you count how many generations from Adam, how many how many thousands of years.
Yeah, if you take it strictly, it's like 1,600 years from the time of Adam's creation until the flood. 1,656. I got it on a chart here. It's not like I got a great memory or anything. It's just I've been thinking about these things along with the Bigfoot thing for years. So that's.
So we could be overdue then.
Yeah, we're starting to, and I've heard it talked about this way too, that if you have 6 days of creation and then the 7th day of rest, and you've probably heard this too, where each day is 1,000 years. And so we are coming up on, again, going strictly from biblical chronology, we're coming up on a 6,000 year mark. I think the Hebrew calendar is 59 something because they trace it from the creation of the world or something like that.
Yeah.
That's their year number. AM, I believe they call it. It's Anno Mundo.
Yeah.
The year of the world since the world began. And Mundo is world. And so with that in mind, we're coming up to the 6,000 year mark. That's 6 days. The 7th day is when he rested. That would be the 1,000 year reign. So we're getting close, maybe. It's just sort of speculative.
Right.
Amen. Amen.
Yes.
Amen. Lord Jesus, Maranatha, come soon. Huh?
Yes.
Yep. Well, anything further?
Yeah, I don't see any more questions. Anyone else have any questions or
Comment?
comments? Here we go
Okay.
from Catherine.
Okay.
She says, this has been very interesting. Brian has done great tonight. I agree, Catherine.
I was interested in everything I said, Catherine. Let me it's a fascinating topic, and it's my privilege to be able to teach this to folks and to share it. And so I'm so glad I got to share it with you folks tonight.
Oh, okay, wait a minute. Here we go. Okay. Cryptid Search says the reforming of Israel started a clock
ticking. I think, yeah, the correction sort of. You're right. Yeah, the reform. Yeah, I was fascinating you say that. I have this book here with me, the book of signs, rather, by David Jeremiah. And I was just listening to this tonight on an audio version.
Mm-hmm.
And I have this passage marked, so it's not like I have to go looking or anything. I thought I'd mark it out in case. And here, this brings it up. This is him talking about the Abrahamic covenant, which, of course, that's when God promised this land unconditionally to Israel, right? And them coming back. And yeah, it's been about seven. You're saying it's been about 7 days since they reformed?
Yeah, six days, 7 days.
Okay. So yeah, that's an interesting thought. I know it's been about 70, little over 70 years now. They're coming up on the 80th year since 1948.
Yeah.
The 28 will be that time in May of 28. He talks about some of the things that God promised with this covenant. It's unconditional, meaning God will keep the covenant. Israel doesn't have to do anything to maintain the covenant. God will. Millennial reign is day 7. Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah. That's. Yeah. I agree. I like that's really possible. Yeah. But God promised Abraham. This is what David Jeremiah writes. He says, God promised to make Abraham a blessing to many. Just think what the world would be missing had it not been for the Jews. Without the Jews, we would have no Bible.
Yeah.
Without the Jews, there would be no 10 Commandments, the basis of jurisprudence among most of the civilized nations of the world.
Right.
We have no law to rein in evil, right? Without the Jews, like we've been talking about tonight, there would have been no Jesus. That's what Satan was counting on, both with Moses and then with Haman, right? Without the Jewish Jesus, there would be no Christianity. And of course, that means without Jesus, there's no salvation.
Right.
But with him, he's the way, the truth, and the life. The Bible is one big, beautiful story. And we've scraped a little bit off of it tonight to look at it in a slightly different way, but you still end up at Jesus. And I think that's the whole point, isn't it?
Yeah.
It all points to him. And you're right about Israel, same thing. He came as to offer the kingdom the first time, and they rejected him. And he came humbly the first time. When he comes again, he'll come riding in on the horse, as we said earlier, and with his sword in his hand, and he'll take out the ones that have been working against. There'll be a judgment far different than what there was with the flood. That's
for sure. And it won't be by a flood. It won't be by water.
Right. Again, that's what, Peter talks about that again in chapter 3. He says that it'll be by fire, right? It was flood waters, but then it'll be fire the second time. So whew. Yeah. I feel like we talked about the whole Bible. Wow.
Just about.
It seems that way.
I know. I keep thinking of other things I want to get your opinion on and so on, but maybe I'm just going to start making notes here.
Okay.
This for the next.
We'll try to get on here again sometime, and because this went really well, Mary. It really did.
I'm glad.
No problems with anything.
Wonderful.
My biggest concern was I was wondering how tech wise it was going to. I had to wear these because otherwise I can't. It hooks up to my microphone. Actually, I guess this is for gaming or something.
Oh.
And so I have to listen through the headphones.
Okay.
I was trying it tonight and I couldn't hear anything coming from the computer on my speakers, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be interesting.
Ooh.
But it probably prevents feedback, actually.
Probably does, and you get a better sound also.
Oh, yeah. So
I'm
it's a good
working through
mic.
my laptop, and which works out great.
Right. Yeah. I had another microphone that I gave to my son. It was a good one. And I used that for when I was doing the online Bible studies,
Yeah.
a few years ago, back in 2020 and 2021, when we couldn't really get together as Christians at church and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I got this one. It even glows and lights up. It's kind of like a cherubim right here in front of me.
With the flaming sword and everything.
Yeah, I hope not. I wouldn't have stuck around for this conversation if we started doing something like that. So, well, thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you.
This was really great. I've been looking forward to this in a lot of ways, and this is the conversation we always needed to have. The other couple times we seen each other, but it just didn't work out. But this worked out great.
It really did, and I'm so happy that you were able to make it. And going by the comments from the chat, everyone enjoyed it. They're saying it was interesting, really nice show, good talk, and just great show. Everyone's given thumbs up. So
well, praise the Lord. Just he gets the glory. I just read his word. Just get into the Bible, study it. I think many of you already do. Just keep doing it, and we need to encourage each other in these days.
We really do.
This kind of thing is very much a part of that, I believe, to support one another.
Yeah, we have to, especially now.
You're right. Yeah. Well, God bless you all. Thank you so much for listening in. Thank you, Mary.
Yes. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you again. And maybe you talk to the
masters of the hoops, and
yes,
yes, and should be able to work it out again. So.
Yeah, and we'll schedule it for another time.
That'll be good. I'll be in touch with you. Let you know. I'll check and let you know how things go and see how it works.
I appreciate that. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Brian, and we'll talk to you later then.
All righty. Good night, all. Rest easy.
All right, everyone. Yes, it was fantastic, fantastic podcast. At least I thought so. And I know that not all of you are Christian, but I pray that you all found it at least interesting. And I know that I saw a heck of a lot of great comments on here and a lot of interaction. And thank you. Thank you all for being polite and keeping the questions just fantastic. So, yeah, Tracy, yes. He has a great sense of humor. Yeah, and Tracy, we'll keep you in our prayers also. But everyone, I think we're going to just go ahead and shut this down. I want to remind you about next week. It'll be the, let me see, I think the 26th. I'll have to look at the calendar again. But that'll be the last podcast of the month. And that will be our fan appreciation podcast. That's whenever we do the giveaways. So make sure that you get on, and we'll be giving away. Well, I'll give out a choice like I did last month, different things, whatever Whoever the prize winner is, you can choose what you want. And, you can choose my book. And what the heck, since everyone found this podcast interesting, I can even order this book and add this as one of the prizes for next week. And we'll see, along with perhaps t-shirt, logo t-shirt, and all kinds of stuff. So we'll see. I'll let you know next week. But thank you. Thank you, everyone. And you all have a great evening. And stay warm. Hunker down from the storms. I know there's a pretty nasty storm going through. My daughter is in Virginia Beach. And they're supposed to get anywhere from 10 inches to a foot of snow, which is extremely unusual for Virginia Beach. All right. So thank you, Robin. I appreciate that. Thank you. So make sure, everyone, you come back next week. And so we'll see you. And have a great evening. God bless. And Monkey Wench out.